Could you please give us your name?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Jeffrey Epstein.
It's November 1991, and we're off the coast of the Canary Islands. Even in winter, the temperatures here are still pleasant. Gentle breezes, warm seawater, and far fewer tourists than in the summer months. These days, a 57-meter-long yacht is anchored off the coast of Tenerife, immediately standing out among the other boats. It's immediately clear that it belongs to someone who's really wealthy. 12 guests can stay overnight on this yacht, in addition to a 15-person crew. The yacht's owner is using this time to find some peace and quiet. He desperately needs it, not because of his 7 children at home or his grueling workday as an entrepreneur, but because things have taken a rather unpleasant turn in recent months. The yacht's name, Lady Ghislaine, named after the owner's favorite daughter, is emblazoned on the hull in gold letters. But soon, another name will adorn the boat, for its owner, Robert Maxwell, will not return alive from his final voyage. Robert Maxwell has had a turbulent year. He has just sold Pergamon Press, the publishing house he founded. Prior to that, he had purchased the New York Daily News in the US. That actually sounds like he has plenty of money in the bank. Otherwise, it would be hard to afford a yacht worth several million pounds, and the staff needed to maintain it. Robert Maxwell's home is in England, more specifically in Oxford. The house where the Maxwell family lives is located on the campus of the famous university. Today, Headington Hill Hall belongs to the law school of an Oxford college. Robert Maxwell and his wife Elizabeth have 9 children together. Maxwell named the yacht he was sailing on in late 1991 after his youngest child, Ghislaine. According to media reports, she is also said to be his favorite among his children. Robert Maxwell took good care of his youngest child. At just 14 years old, she was allowed to do an internship at his publishing company. In her autobiography, her mother writes about Ghislaine, noting that she was the only one of the couple's children who was truly spoiled. This is no coincidence, as shortly before Ghislaine's birth, her brother nearly died in an accident, and another of the Maxwell's children died in infancy. However, the children also experienced discipline, including Ghislaine, yet she still idolized her father. Now, as an adult, she has been hired as a consultant for one of his companies. At the time, she was just about 30 years old. Robert Maxwell had even founded a company that Ghislaine was supposed to run herself, a company that sells corporate gifts. Just at the beginning of the year, Maxwell sent his daughter from her home in Oxford, England, to the US to work there. Prior to that, she had studied history and linguistics at the University of Oxford. The Maxwell family is well known even beyond academic circles, even though that's where it all began. Robert Maxwell founded Pergamon Press, a major publisher of scholarly literature. Robert Maxwell's story is certainly remarkable. He lost his close relatives in Auschwitz, and he himself fought in World War II. Afterward, he settled in England and rose to become one of the most successful entrepreneurs of all time. First came the founding of Pergamon Press, then the acquisition of the British Mirror newspaper group. This was followed by the purchase of additional companies in Israel and Eastern Europe. To gain a foothold in the United States as well, he assembled a team of renowned consultants and lawyers to assist him. Among them were former Senators Howard Baker and John Tower, as well as longtime Republican Robert Keith Gray, who worked on the Reagan-Bush campaign during the 1980 election. We've already seen this in the first episode about Epstein's rise. Much like his daughter's later accomplice, Robert Maxwell is said to have used his prominent connections to repeatedly impress new people and bring them into his circle of friends. But all this glamour began to peel away in late 1991. First, he spends a few days on his yacht off the coast of Madeira before heading on to Tenerife. There, Robert receives several faxes, none of which are particularly positive. For it seems that Maxwell, a multi-millionaire, is in considerable financial trouble. Rumors are circulating in the financial press that Maxwell is deeply in debt and unable to pay it off. The newspaper notes that the stock price of Maxwell's company, Maxwell Communications, suddenly and miraculously skyrockets. At the same time, it was recently reported that Maxwell is planning to sell 49% of his shares in the Mirror Group. And for good reason. He recently had to put up several of the newspaper's buildings as collateral for a total of $166 million. This doesn't sit well with the fact that he is said to have enjoyed spending the summer evenings of 1991 in casinos, where he would sometimes gamble away as much as £2.5 million in a single night. In the period leading up to his yacht vacation, he shuffled money back and forth between his companies, while simultaneously trying to balance demands from banks, particularly Goldman Sachs, for loan repayments. He was actually supposed to have a meeting on November 4th with the Bank of England, which had some questions about his tangled finances. But Robert Maxwell skipped that meeting. On top of that, the Swiss Bank Corporation is breathing down his neck. According to reports, it is threatening to contact the anti-fraud agency and file a complaint against him. On October 31, 1991, the investment banking firm Goldman Sachs sold off a large portion of its Maxwell Communications shares. This sale was scheduled to be made public on November 5th and would likely trigger further stock sales by other investors. Amid all this, Robert is fleeing to the Canary Islands. But the idyllic setting does little to improve his tense mood. Early in the morning, he complains to his yacht crew that the temperature in his cabin isn't to his liking. This complaint is the last known words spoken by Robert Maxwell. For just a few hours later, he would be recovered from the Atlantic, dead. What happened on the Lady Ghislaine on the morning of November 5, 1991, remains unclear to this day. Even Maxwell's wife Elizabeth does not yet know what is going on when she receives the news that her husband has gone overboard. The captain of the Lady Ghislaine called one of her sons to report that Robert Maxwell had disappeared. She immediately sets off for Gran Canaria, accompanied by a journalist from the Mirror. While they were still in the air, Robert Maxwell's body was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean. By the time Robert Maxwell's fate had been confirmed, the Ghislaine Maxwell family's youngest daughter had also arrived in Gran Canaria. Several people later recalled seeing her literally break down upon her arrival. Her father's death hits the young woman hard. Since she speaks Spanish fluently, she is likely the one who handles many of the formalities surrounding the media mogul's sudden death. The body had to be recovered using a stretcher, which caused some abrasions on the body. However, these are the only injuries identified during an autopsy. At his family's request, Maxwell's body is to be embalmed as soon as possible and released for burial. Internal organs are removed and sent to the mainland for further examination. The death certificate states that Maxwell died of heart and lung failure. Another autopsy report is prepared in Israel. There, drowning is determined to be the most likely cause of death. It is said that all evidence points to an accidental fall into the sea. Condolences pour in from all over the world, from the British Prime Minister, the American President, and the President of the then Soviet Union. In Israel, Robert is buried in Jerusalem amid great public sympathy. Even the Israeli Prime Minister is present. We begin today's episode with the sudden death of Robert Maxwell for a reason. For this event marks a turning point in the life of his youngest daughter. After her father's death, Ghislaine Maxwell decides to move permanently to New York City. A friend of hers lives there, one who had also known her father. Her father had scrutinized the guy closely when he found out that Ghislaine liked spending time with him. Robert Maxwell specifically asked his two acquaintances, Ace Greenberg and Jimmy Kane, what they thought of this guy. Greenberg and Kane knew the young man because he had once worked with them at Bear Stearns. And Greenberg and Kane seemed to vouch for their friend. They said Ghislaine would be in good hands with Jeffrey Epstein. As early as November 1991, Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein were sitting next to each other at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Robert Maxwell had been dead for 19 days at that point. They had gathered there for a memorial service for Robert Maxwell. Epstein, presumably, did not have to purchase one of the $500 tickets, as he was accompanying his daughter. During his lifetime, Robert Maxwell himself was a frequent guest at the Plaza Hotel. This was true even while he was under FBI surveillance for 8 years, starting in 1953. The FBI had been monitoring him because he was maintaining contacts with American nuclear scientists at secret research centers at the time. As was feared at the time, he was doing so on behalf of the Soviet Union. In 1961, however, the investigation against him was closed without any results. It was only after his death, through the release of documents, that it became known that Maxwell had in fact collaborated with the KGB, as well as with the intelligence services of other countries. This was reported by the British Guardian in 2000. In 1991, however, something entirely different first came to light. About a month after Robert Maxwell's death, it emerged that the publisher was alleged to have committed a massive fraud prior to his death. To keep his companies afloat, he had plundered his employees' pension funds. According to media reports, the total amount involved was £460 million. According to these reports, Maxwell is said to have deprived his staff of up to 70% of their company pension benefits. Numerous myths and conspiracy theories surround his death, not least because Ghislaine Maxwell herself said in a 1997 interview that she believed her father had been murdered. Just 2 weeks before his death, Robert Maxwell is said to have met with private investigators. He reportedly told them that someone was after him. However, he apparently had no specific suspicions himself. In the end, driven by paranoia, he is said to have even bugged the offices of his own employees. It is estimated that his companies were in the red by more than $2 billion at the time of his death. This sum likely resulted, among other things, from the fact that he borrowed over $3 billion in the late 1980s to buy the Macmillan Publishing House and expand his empire. Robert Maxwell's death and posthumous downfall are, to put it mildly, rather inglorious. Nevertheless, his youngest daughter, Ghislaine, continues to maintain her place in high society. The money that disappeared from the pension funds remains missing. 2 of her brothers, Kevin and Ian, were later put on trial for their roles in their father's business dealings, but they successfully defended themselves against charges of fraud. Instead, a British government fund covered at least 100 million of the embezzled pension funds. Robert Maxwell's widow, Elizabeth, claims she knew nothing about her husband's schemes either. Moreover, she says she is in fact the only one who lost her pension from the Mirror Group and now faces financial ruin, just like her children. In an interview in 1992, she explicitly emphasizes, with regard to her youngest daughter Ghislaine, that she too has nothing. No money, no trust funds, no assets anywhere. However, this contradicts reports that Ghislaine is said to receive about £80,000 annually from a trust fund in Liechtenstein following her father's death. The most plausible explanation might be that, for people as wealthy as the Maxwells, £80,000 is perhaps equivalent to nothing. Ghislaine Maxwell manages to start over in New York. Before long, she and Jeffrey Epstein officially become a couple. It remains unclear to this day exactly how long they had known each other beforehand. The Epstein files indicate that, according to Epstein, they met through mutual friends. Epstein also reported that he helped Maxwell through a difficult period in her life. This presumably refers to the time following her father's death. Epstein further claims that he helped Maxwell gain a foothold in the business world and also provided her with financial assistance. However, Maxwell later repaid him for that initial financial support. Other documents from the newly released Epstein files, however, paint a somewhat different picture. The files also contain FBI transcripts of conversations with a former business partner of the Maxwells. This individual claims that before his death, Robert Maxwell instructed his son Kevin to seek out Epstein in order to get the family's struggling finances back on track. The informant reportedly told the FBI that Kevin Maxwell met Epstein between 1988 and 1990. The Maxwell son then allegedly began transferring large sums of money from Epstein's circle into his own. We already know from episode 1 of this series that Epstein handled financial deals and raised money for wealthy business partners. However, the fact that he may have done the same for the Maxwells was unknown until the publication of the new files. The former business partner is also said to have told the FBI that Kevin then introduced Epstein to his sister, Ghislaine. After Robert Maxwell's death, Kevin is said to have negotiated an agreement with his sister and Epstein. These claims contradict what Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell themselves have said about how they met. Kevin Maxwell has dismissed the witness's account as completely untrue. Ultimately, we must therefore still attach a big question mark to this point. The fact is that Maxwell and Epstein repeatedly appeared as a couple in the early 1990s. Among other things, they showed up together at a party at Donald Trump's estate in 1992. The fact that Epstein was also involved with other women does not seem to bother Maxwell. Quite the contrary, as the world would learn years later. In 1993, 2 years after Epstein and Maxwell's first public appearance as a couple, an interesting ad appeared in a yoga magazine. The Yoga Journal was seeking a private instructor for yoga lessons. It was a full-time position in New York to teach a private client. The job included fantastic perks, such as extensive travel. Those interested were to contact a certain Miss Maxwell at the phone number provided. The number led directly to Jeffrey Epstein's office. At first glance, this job offer might seem a bit strange, but harmless. But everyone must judge for themselves how likely that is. If you've already watched episode 2, you know what Epstein did years later to young women who were lured into his home under the pretense of receiving massage therapy. Ghislaine Maxwell is said to have played a key role in this as well. As early as 1994, sisters Annie and Maria Farmer reported Epstein and Maxwell to the authorities. They accused not only Epstein, but also Maxwell explicitly of sexual assault. However, once again, justice was not served. In the early 90s, Maxwell spent more and more time at Epstein's various residences. This included the house in Palm Beach, Florida, but she also acquired a home of her own. In 2000, she moved into a 650 square meter townhouse in New York City. It's just a few blocks away from Epstein's mansion and cost around $5 million. The townhouse was paid for by an anonymous LLC. However, this LLC is registered at the same address as the offices of the company J. Epstein & Company. What's always astonishing about this case is just how much we actually already knew all along. Don't get me wrong, I don't think anyone could have anticipated the full extent of it all. But key details that are now being discussed as breaking news can also be found in press archives from that time. It's a bit as if many pieces of the puzzle had been there all along. It's just that no one could, or wanted to, put them together to form the bigger picture. In 2001, for example, the British press reported on the friendship between Maxwell and the then British Prince Andrew. According to the report, Prince Andrew is said to have gone on vacation with Maxwell 8 times. In February 2000, they reportedly stayed together at the Mar-a-Lago Club and then took a trip to New York City for a fashion show. In March, the two are seen together at a charity event. The following month, they are in New York City. In May 2000, there is another trip to visit Maxwell, as well as a stay in Florida with him. The following month, Andrew takes Maxwell to an event at Windsor Castle. In the fall, the two were back in New York together. In December 2000, they rang out the year at the Sandringham estate to celebrate Maxwell's birthday. In January 2001, they flew to Thailand together. This 2001 press report already mentions that Maxwell had introduced Andrew to her longtime partner, Epstein. Epstein was also present on 5 of these trips. In addition, Andrew was a guest at his New York home. It is also said that Maxwell was desperately trying to get Epstein to marry her, but Ghislaine's company was important to him in other ways. She organized his social life. An article in the Evening Standard at the time stated that the palace was concerned about the influence Epstein and Maxwell had on Andrew. Today, now that we know more about the Epstein scandal, it's fascinating to see how much information had already been known for years, and also how much speculation and conjecture was already circulating in the press back then. For example, about how Epstein actually amassed his fortune, or how Maxwell could still finance her lifestyle despite her late father's massive debts, or about what exactly was going on between the mysterious financier Epstein and the daughter of publishing mogul Maxwell. The fact that the relationship between the two was not a conventional monogamous partnership was already implied between the lines of many reports back then. In line with this, a Word document is later found that she is said to have written in October 2002. It reads as follows: Jeffrey and Ghislaine have been a couple for 11 years. Contrary to popular belief, they are rarely apart. I almost always see them together. Jeffrey and Ghislaine share many interests and have a lot of fun together. Both are very curious and eager to learn. She grew up surrounded by scientists and in an academic and business environment. Jeffrey and Ghislaine complement each other very well, and I cannot imagine one without the other. They are not only a great couple, but also best friends. Even though the document is written in the third person, it is believed that Maxwell herself wrote down the story of herself and Epstein here. Epstein himself said in a 2003 interview with Vanity Fair that Ghislaine Maxwell was his best friend. Journalist Vicky Ward noted even back then that Ghislaine seems to organize Epstein's entire life. Former employees at Epstein's Palm Beach mansion later described Maxwell as a sort of lady of the house. She is said to have supervised the staff, handled the finances, and generally coordinated all kinds of appointments. Among other things, she drafted a 58-page document setting out rules for Epstein's household staff. For example, staff were to speak only after being addressed and avoid eye contact with Epstein. In addition, she managed the household accounts, which were even registered in her name. Maxwell's former assistant later testified that she had the impression the actual romantic relationship between her and Epstein had already ended around 2000. Nevertheless, she remained by Epstein's side. Between 1999 and 2007, Epstein is said to have transferred a total of $30 million to accounts held by Ghislaine Maxwell. The strange relationship between the two is, however, not a one-way street. Epstein may have had the money, but Ghislaine Maxwell had connections through her father's career in publishing. And if you've watched episode 1 of this video series, you already know how important it was for Epstein to cultivate a network. Through Ghislaine's friendships, Epstein once again gained access to a whole new circle of people. Many reports and documentaries portray it as if Ghislaine Maxwell had been, so to speak, under Epstein's spell, as if she did everything just to please him. I don't presume to know anything better. After all, none of us were there, and we can only piece together the fragments that have made it into the public domain. But I think this portrayal is quite trivializing. It assigns Ghislaine Maxwell an almost passive role, and that was certainly not the case. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been sentenced to 20 years in prison. We'll take a closer look at Maxwell's sentence in a later episode. But I think it's important to emphasize that allegations of abuse were also made against Ghislaine Maxwell early on. As early as the mid-1990s, even though this information never made it into the FBI files. And there's also a survivor from the 2000s who very clearly highlights Maxwell's role in Epstein's system. As you heard in the second episode, Jeffrey Epstein was first convicted in 2008 for soliciting prostitution, even though it was already clear at the time that there was much more to the case. While Epstein was in custody following his conviction, this did not seem to further damage Ghislaine Maxwell's reputation. Not much is known yet about the contact she and Epstein may have had after his conviction. However, there are indications that, like so many other things, the relationship between Epstein and Maxwell continued. In 2009, for example, Epstein reportedly transferred about $25,000 to a member of Maxwell's family, Al Seckel, the husband of Ghislaine's sister Isabel. He was allegedly supposed to use the money to assemble a team of hackers to remove negative information about Epstein from Wikipedia and Google. On November 6, 2010, Al Seckel sent an email to Epstein with the subject line, "Hacking Wiki Again." A month earlier, he had written to Epstein saying he had taken care of the Google search results. No articles about his conviction or the allegations appear anymore. In another email from 2009, Epstein hints that Maxwell's sister Isabel herself, as well as another sister, Christine, also received payments from him. At the very least, he notes in his email, Isabel Maxwell not paid, Christine Maxwell not paid. Also in 2009, while Epstein was still in quasi-detention, he received an email from a nonprofit organization called Blue World Alliance. The organization asked him for a donation of $10 million. The president of this organization at the time was Isabel Maxwell. However, based on the emails published so far, it is not clear whether Epstein actually made this payment. When contacted by the media in 2026, Isabel Maxwell declined to comment. In 2009 itself, Jeffrey Epstein had other problems besides requests for money from his circle of acquaintances. One that would haunt him, with some interruptions, until his death in 2019. On May 1, 2009, a lawsuit was filed in South Florida. It was filed under an anonymous name, Jane Doe number 102. Today, we know that Virginia Jeffrey is the person behind this pseudonym. The defendant is Jeffrey Epstein. The accompanying document begins with what was already known at the time, but had been only minimally acknowledged by the courts. Based on current knowledge and belief, the defendant has a sexual preference for He devised a plan, a conspiracy, or an enterprise through which he gained access to countless vulnerable and relatively economically disadvantaged He sexually abused, harassed, and/or exploited them and subsequently gave them money. The defendant used his resources and influence over vulnerable to systematically sexually abuse them. The article goes on to describe the pyramid scheme I told you about in episode 1, how Epstein manipulated his own victims into constantly bringing new girls to him. And one of the victims, Virginia Jeffrey, decides to hold Epstein accountable in 2009. Virginia meets Epstein in the summer of 1998. She works at a place whose name you all know, Mar-a-Lago. She got the job through her father, who worked there as a janitor. The following events are based on the statements recorded in Virginia's lawsuit filed in May 2009. So, in the summer of 1998, while she was working at Mar-a-Lago, Virginia was approached by a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell. Maxwell asked her if she'd be interested in getting proper training as a massage therapist and earning a lot of money in the process. She said she had an acquaintance who could make that happen, and that very same evening, Virginia's father dropped the teenager off at Epstein's house. Maxwell welcomed the two of them and promised to make sure Virginia got home safely later. Since Maxwell was part of the Mar-a-Lago circle and was a mature, personable woman, Virginia's father apparently had no qualms about leaving her there. So Virginia went into the house with Maxwell and met Epstein there. This encounter followed a similar pattern to what victims had already described in the mid-2000s. What had started out as a supposedly harmless massage, and had been agreed upon as such, turned into a sexual assault. Virginia reports that both Epstein and Maxwell sexually assaulted her that evening. Afterward, she was given cash and driven home by one of Epstein's employees. In the 2 weeks that followed, Virginia was summoned to Epstein's house every day, where the assaults were repeated. Epstein told Virginia she should quit her job at Mar-a-Lago and work for him instead. That way, she could earn much more money and also accompany him on his travels. I know that many people always wonder why a victim returns to the perpetrator, but that is precisely why Epstein and Maxwell sought out victims in economically vulnerable situations. In her autobiography, published in 2025, Virginia recounts childhood abuse by her father, neglect by her mother, a stay in a juvenile detention center where psychological abuse was commonplace, and further abuse by peers and older men during her teenage years. In her book, she explains very clearly how this led her to endure the assaults by Epstein and Maxwell in the late 1990s. She came from a dysfunctional family and had been subjected to abuse from an early age. So she agreed to quit her job at Mar-a-Lago and thus became dependent on the money Epstein paid her. And so Epstein, as well as Maxwell, whom Virginia describes as an accomplice in her 2009 lawsuit, were able to make her increasingly compliant and exploit her. Virginia also reported as early as 2009 that there were many other young women there, many of whom did not speak English well, from the Czech Republic, Turkey, or Asia. She recounts that it was not only Epstein and Maxwell who committed sexual assaults, but also Epstein's close associates, members of royal families, politicians, academics, businessmen, and Epstein's personal or professional acquaintances. Some of the abuse took place at Epstein's home in Palm Beach, but also while traveling, either on his private jet, on his infamous island, or at vacation rentals. It wasn't until she was 19 that Virginia managed to escape. Epstein had sent her to Thailand for a massage course. From there, however, Virginia did not fly back to the US, but instead traveled on her own to Australia, where she has lived since 2002. There, she managed to lie low and avoid Epstein, until 2008. That's when she suddenly received several calls from Epstein's agents, according to the documents. They bombarded her with questions about the allegations then being made against Epstein. They asked whether Virginia knew who the others were who were now going to the police, whether she was in contact with any of them, and whether she herself was planning to file a complaint against Epstein as well. Understandably, this really frightened Virginia. She was practically on the other side of the world, had changed her phone number, and yet Epstein's people had found her. Out of fear, she promised in 2008 not to testify against Epstein. But now, a year later, she is filing a lawsuit in Florida. The goal of this lawsuit, which Virginia Giuffre filed in May 2009, is a trial by jury. That very same day, the authorities issued a subpoena for Jeffrey Epstein. The response was not long in coming. On May 11th, Epstein and his attorneys replied with a letter. Virginia had filed her lawsuit anonymously as Jane Doe 102. However, Epstein initially sought to compel that her anonymity be lifted for the remainder of the proceedings. Virginia is not the only woman to file another lawsuit against Epstein. Yet this is not yet the point at which the full extent of his schemes will come to light. Along with him, Ghislaine Maxwell also receives a subpoena in September 2009. It is served to her as she is leaving the Clinton Global Initiative Conference. She is to be questioned about her role in the allegations against Epstein. The court hearings were scheduled for February 2010, but the case never went to trial at that time. On November 17, 2009, Epstein agreed to pay $500,000 to the plaintiff. In return, Virginia Giuffre agreed to release Epstein and all other individuals or entities that could have been named as potential defendants from any liability and to leave them in peace forever. The lawsuit she filed against Epstein was thus dropped. Jeffrey Epstein himself is said to have orchestrated this deal and taken great care to ensure that not only was he himself protected, but also all other individuals whom Virginia might have accused of wrongdoing. In exchange, Epstein promised to respect Virginia's right to anonymity and never to contact her again. Virginia Giuffre is not the only one to have reached such an out-of-court settlement with Epstein. The Palm Beach Post reported in 2009 on at least 4 such settlements. In its article at the time, the Palm Beach Post pointed out something crucial. Epstein has virtually unlimited financial resources to defend himself and to put pressure on the plaintiffs. And in 2009, that appears to be exactly what happened. Epstein's private investigators reportedly questioned friends, ex-boyfriends, family members, and employers of the women who were planning to file a lawsuit against him. All of this was done to find information that could discredit the plaintiffs. Epstein's lawyers also appear to have been actively involved once again. One of them is said to have grilled one of the plaintiffs for 8 hours about 3 abortions she had had, her own sexual behavior, and the nature of her relationship with Epstein. A judge overseeing the preliminary proceedings reprimanded Epstein's lawyers for this conduct. Epstein's lawyers are instructed to refrain from repeated questioning and are expected to conduct themselves in a responsible and professional manner, as befits members of the bar. One of the victim's attorneys suggests that an out-of-court settlement is at least somewhat akin to an admission of guilt. Although there had been dozens of specific allegations against Epstein in previous years, he got off without a proper trial and served only a short prison sentence. For some of the women, such a settlement may seem like the only chance to have it acknowledged that Epstein actually abused them. We'll talk more about Virginia Giuffre and other victims in one of the upcoming episodes, but for now, let's take another look at the system surrounding the abuse network. This pyramid scheme is itself just one part of a larger pyramid system that we should examine here. First, we'll be mentioning the names of individuals who, to date, have not been charged with or convicted of any crime in this context. Evidence of their involvement emerges from the victims' accounts. Do you remember that as part of his 2008 plea deal, Epstein secured immunity for all potential co-conspirators? Specifically, this involves 4 women: Sarah Callan, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, and Nadia Marcinkowa. The New York Times describes the system surrounding these potential co-conspirators as a kind of hierarchy. At the top are Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Several victims have stated that Maxwell essentially ran the recruitment network. She was assisted in this by the woman who, according to the Times, is directly below Maxwell in the hierarchy, Sarah Callan. She was later accused in several court proceedings of coordinating meetings between the victims and Epstein at his Palm Beach mansion. According to police reports, she maintained an address database containing the names and cell phone numbers of the victims whom Epstein lured to his home under the pretense of massages. Many victims also report that it was Sarah Callan who greeted them at Epstein's home, escorted them to him, and gave them their cash at the end. Some say that Callan and Maxwell gave them tips on how to approach these so-called massages. Sarah Callan began working for Epstein in 2002. However, Callan also claims to have been a victim of Epstein and Maxwell herself. She claims she was regularly abused while working for him. In addition, the name Leslie Groff is often mentioned. She was Epstein's assistant at the time. As she herself told the police in 2005, she managed his schedule and answered and coordinated phone calls for him. At least one victim later testified that Leslie Groff also organized transportation and accommodations for the victims. Her attorney states that she never engaged in any misconduct and never knowingly made travel arrangements for victims. Her job was limited exclusively to the standard duties of an assistant. Although she was later sued by 3 victims, the lawsuits were dismissed. Adriana Ross is also said to have worked for Epstein starting in 2002, when she was 19 years old. She is said to have been the one who, prior to the raid in the mid-2000s, ensured that a few hard drives disappeared from the house. Not much else is known. She has never publicly commented on the nature of her connection to Epstein. Several victims report that Epstein persuaded them to become intimate with Nadia Marcinkova. Epstein is said to have boasted that he had bought her from her family. This would mean that Nadia herself was a victim and, like the others, was pressured or coerced into becoming an accomplice. She is said to have first entered the United States on a visa issued to her by Jean-Luc Brunel's modeling agency M2, whom you already know from Part 2 of this series. While Epstein was in custody between 2008 and 2009, Marcinkova appeared on the visitor list a total of 67 times. In 2010, she was still registered at Epstein's address in Palm Beach, though she is said to have tried to leave him that same year. In 2012, she obtained a pilot's license. According to the New York Post, she is also said to have flown one of Epstein's planes. However, she was never the subject of a criminal investigation. In 2019, her lawyers stated that Epstein had recruited her as a victim of abuse as well. They requested time until she was ready to tell her story. It is now known that she is said to have been very cooperative with authorities during subsequent investigations. So perhaps she could be classified in the lowest, and likely the broadest, category of this pyramid scheme. Those who were themselves victims of Epstein and went on to recruit others. It's hard to imagine the pressure and dependence these victims were under. And according to current findings, all of this pressure came from Epstein and Maxwell. Unlike the 4 female alleged co-conspirators, there is one person in Epstein's circle who was, in fact, convicted back then. However, the conviction was not for involvement in the crimes for which Epstein was imprisoned between 2008 and 2009, but rather for a notebook. On November 3, 2009, a man named Alfredo Rodriguez met with another man whom he believed to be a lawyer representing one of Epstein's victims. In reality, the man was an undercover FBI agent who recorded the entire encounter. The month before, a lawyer for one of Epstein's victims had contacted the authorities and reported that he had received a call out of the blue from Rodriguez. Rodriguez had tried to sell him a notebook that allegedly contained further information regarding the allegations against Jeffrey Epstein. Rodriguez had touted this notebook, which even the investigators had not yet seen, as the holy grail of the Epstein case. The lawyer reported Rodriguez's offer directly to the FBI. The lawyer pretended to Rodriguez that he was interested in the notebook and would send one of his employees to a meeting to discuss the details. On November 3, 2009, Rodriguez unsuspectingly showed the employee a small black notebook he had brought with him. The notebook allegedly contained the names, addresses, and phone numbers of prominent figures, potential witnesses, and hundreds of other alleged victims from New York, New Mexico, and Paris. But that's not all. During the conversation, Rodriguez also mentioned that he had once seen Ghislaine Maxwell set up a large computer database containing images and information. According to Rodriguez, It contained nude photographs of young women from Sweden, Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Brazil. In addition to the computer database, Epstein himself had filled out the notebook, which the unsuspecting Rodriguez is now holding up in front of an undercover investigator. He says he wants $50,000 in exchange for handing over the notebook. When the undercover agent asks why he didn't simply give the notebook to the police, Rodriguez says he feared Epstein would hurt him or even make him disappear if he handed the notebook over to the police. So, he kept it with him. Shortly after these recordings were made, Rodriguez was arrested for obstruction of justice. He worked at Epstein's estate in Palm Beach in 2004 and 2005, exactly the period during which Epstein is alleged to have committed many of the crimes he was charged with. Rodriguez describes his role during that time as a mix of butler, chauffeur, cook, and housekeeper. As early as January 2007, Rodriguez was questioned as part of the investigation into Epstein. He admitted to several things, including that he sometimes cleaned up and tidied the toys after Epstein's assaults. He also claims to have known who Epstein regularly abused at his estate, and states that he saw corresponding images and videos on computers in Epstein's house. In any case, Rodriguez was an important witness during those investigations. During his questioning, he was also urged to produce any potentially incriminating material. But he kept the small black notebook to himself. Had the notebook been available back then, it might have served as evidence to secure a stronger case against Epstein, as the book contained the names of potential witnesses and other victims with whom the police had not yet spoken. Alfredo Rodriguez is sentenced to 18 months in prison. Incidentally, this is exactly the same prison sentence as his former boss. After the first verdict against Jeffrey Epstein, his best friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, stopped appearing in public with him as often as she had before. Instead, she turned her attention to charitable work and founded a marine conservation organization in 2012, even though it didn't accomplish much, at least when it came to doing what it was supposed to do on paper, protecting the oceans. In other respects, the organization may well have served a purpose. There is speculation that it served merely as a diplomatic and logistical shield for Coast Guard operations. The fact is that in 2012, the year Maxwell's organization Terra Mar was founded, a German shipyard delivered a yacht called the Plan B. According to media reports, the buyer was Maxwell's former partner, Ted Waite. Maxwell is said to have helped convert the Plan B yacht into a sort of floating base. We're talking about a 75-meter-long vessel with a helipad and a moon pool. In theory, small submersibles could be lowered into the water unnoticed through it. Reportedly, investigators are currently discussing the theory that there may have been concealed underwater access points to Epstein's island, allowing small submersibles to be smuggled directly onto the island. If it's true that this yacht has a moon pool, and it's also true that there were underwater access points for small submersibles, then this would make it possible to transport people to the island without having to account for them at border, passport, or customs checks. After all, there are passenger lists even for many of the flights Epstein took on private jets. Even if many of the passengers, presumably women, are listed there only by their initials. A maritime infrastructure might have made it possible to circumvent even that. However, there is no evidence in the documents released so far of the existence of such a system. Others see the founding of Maxwell's Marine Rescue Foundation simply as a desperate attempt to clear her name. The fact is that between 2013 and 2017, Terra Mar did not disperse a single dollar in grants, incurred fairly high administrative costs for a small organization, and could not point to any concrete examples of successful marine conservation projects. When she isn't attending conferences on behalf of Terra Mar, Maxwell continues to mingle in high society. She attends Vanity Fair's Oscar party, poses for photos with Elon Musk, attends the wedding of the president's daughter Chelsea Clinton, and moves in publishing circles. In 2012, she founded another company, Almex Enterprise Limited. Ghislaine Maxwell is listed as the sole director and secretary. In the records of the UK Companies Register, Maxwell is listed as a resident of the United Kingdom with a registered address in Salisbury. The address listed for the company is in London. However, Almex Enterprise Limited is a dormant company with net assets of £1. Despite her closeness to Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell continued to move in the highest circles in the early 2000s, as if nothing had happened. She publicly rejected the allegations made by Virginia Giuffre, who had already reached an out-of-court settlement with Epstein. Moreover, she called the victims liars. And that had consequences, because in 2015, Virginia filed a defamation lawsuit against Maxwell as a result. And from this point on, things began to move faster than before. A brief preview. In 2016, Ghislaine Maxwell's townhouse in New York City was suddenly sold. Previously, offices belonging to one of Epstein's companies had been registered at that address. Ghislaine withdrew from the city's high society. Her lawyers claimed that even they did not know exactly where their client was currently living. Ghislaine Maxwell disappeared from the public eye, but only for the time being, because this is where the long road to justice begins. In Episode 4, we'll discuss how Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and charged again in 2019. Today, we talked for the first time about Ghislaine Maxwell's family background and took a closer look at the network she allegedly formed together with Epstein. If you found this episode informative, please feel free to leave a like or subscribe. As you can surely imagine, the episodes in this series take an insane amount of time to produce. A like and a comment take just a second for you and really help the channel out immensely. Other than that, there isn't much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching this, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.